Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Some candidates emerging for this Michigan defensive line coach position opening. Want to get into some of these names, give you guys some of my thoughts and opinions on some names that have gotten a lot of buzz over the last 48 hours. And we got four names to talk about. Some of these names are awfully surprising for me as well, but it goes back to the conversation we had when Michigan started this process of trying to hire a defensive line coach. And that is, it has to be one of, if not the most attractive job opened in college football as we speak. When you talk about coming into a defensive line room that has Mason Graham, that has Kenneth Grant, Josiah Stewart, Derek Moore, and a ton of young talent, if you are a coach that is looking to take some steps up the coaching hierarchy, coaching this Michigan defensive line seems like a very effective step. And you see with some of these names, I mean, Sherrone Moore is swinging a big sword in terms of surrounding himself with elite coaches and elite position coaches. Really excited to get into this one. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys and a massive shout out to the Michigan fans, whether we're talking recruiting, film reviews, position breakdowns, the amount of support you guys continue to show to the boys truly does mean a lot. Many of you guys know I'm a massive Michigan fan myself. Can't thank y'all enough for rocking with it. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And much more importantly, would love to hear some of your thoughts, opinions on these defensive line coach candidates. And without further ado, let's get into this one. I want to talk about one that I think is a very realistic option and one that I would be a massive fan of, and that is Lou Esposito, who was the Western Michigan defensive line coach for the last 6 years. He just takes a job at Memphis heading into the 2024 season. One, this is extremely realistic, right? You talk about beating out Memphis for a defensive line coach. Michigan picks up the phone, makes that call, gives him an offer. He's coming to Ann Arbor to coach this defensive line. But what really stands out to me about Lou Esposito is this is an elite player developer, right? You haven't really gotten much of a chance to evaluate him on the recruiting trail because recruiting at Western Michigan, it is kind of hard to get a feel of how he's going to recruit at Michigan. That being said, you talk about player development. That was a Western Michigan defense that in 2022 had 3 defensive linemen that will be being selected in the NFL draft in the next 2 months. Braden Fisk, Andre Carter, Marshawn Nealon. You don't normally see that from position groups from a program like Western Michigan. I think 2 things really stand out. One, the player evaluation from the high school ranks, obviously on point, right? A lot of these guys, Braden Fisk, many of you guys know the star Florida State defensive lineman, didn't have a single offer from a MAC program besides Western Michigan. You talk about the evaluation of some diamonds in the rough. Lou Esposito, I think, has shown that ability to not only bring those diamonds in the rough to Western Michigan, but get those guys developed to be elite defensive linemen at the college football level. I mean, 3 defensive linemen getting drafted in the 2024 NFL draft at Western Michigan. You got a lot of Power 5 programs that don't even have 2 defensive linemen going to the NFL draft. Lou Esposito has 3 guys that he has coached up going to the NFL draft. Phenomenal player developer and a guy that I think is a really good evaluator on the recruiting trail. And that's something Michigan has really specialized in, right? You get a lot of fans from outside the Michigan program saying Michigan's not being able to recruit at a high level. Yeah, maybe according to 24/7 Sports, but you talk about the Rod Moores, the Mikey Barretts, who came into this program as 3 stars, the quote-unquote diamond in the rough. That's how Michigan likes to recruit. Lou Esposito, a guy that I think certainly could recruit that way. The next name I want to talk about, and we won't spend too much time because we talked about him earlier with some coaching candidates, Terence Jameson from Illinois. I continue to be a massive fan of Terence Jameson. Obviously a phenomenal player developer, guys like Johnny Newton, Keith Randolph, but also the experience in the Big Ten. This is a guy that played for Wisconsin, has coached at Illinois, has coached at Purdue, has even coached at Texas Tech in the Big 12, has a lot of experience and a very proven resume in terms of the player development that Terence Jameson brings to the table. These are probably, in my mind, the 2 most realistic candidates that we've seen emerge. And I think Michigan could go out and grab either one of those guys pretty routinely. Now, the next 2 names are names that didn't necessarily come to mind because I don't know if I think Michigan will have a tougher time getting these kind of guys. But We just saw Michigan go to Ohio State and grab their running back coach in Tony Alford. So, I mean, as Michigan fans, we've learned that nothing is off the table for Sherrone Moore in this Michigan program. I think Michigan has established itself as one of the most attractive destinations for coaches to come, and that has shown itself in terms of who Sherrone Moore has hired, right? You go to Tennessee, a premier blue blood team in the SEC. You bring in Brian Jean-Marie from the linebacker room. You go to Ohio State, bring their running backs coach to Michigan. The two guys I want to talk about, we'll go to my favorite one. And if Michigan lands Todd Bates from Oklahoma, this would be the definition of a home run hire. And again, how realistic is it? He just got a promotion for Oklahoma over the last couple of months. Not sure how realistic it is. That being said, if Michigan can pull this one off, this is, in my mind, one of, if not the best defensive line coach that we see in the country now. A background on Todd Bates. Not only did he follow Brent Venables to Oklahoma, has revamped that defensive line, has got it done on the recruiting trail. You go back to his time at Clemson, and many Michigan fans remember those Clemson days with Brent Venables as the defensive coordinator. You talk about how those Clemson defenses were so dominant. It started up front, right? And Todd Bates was the mastermind of that Clemson defensive line. Not only an elite player developer that has put out multiple first-round NFL draft picks. You start scrolling down on the recruiting trail, there's not a guy better in the business, right? Brian Brazee, the number one overall recruit coming out of high school, David Stone, DeMonte Capehart, EJ Williams, Miles Murphy. The amount of talent that Todd Bates has been able to attract both at his times at Oklahoma and Clemson, he is one of, if not the best recruiter in the country on the defensive line. But more importantly, he has taken that talent and developed those guys into top NFL draft picks. Now, the next name I want to talk about is going to Alabama and grabbing their defensive line coach in Freddy Roach, who, again, not only an elite recruiter for Alabama during those times that Nick Saban was retained by Kalen DeBoer, has also developed himself a ton of elite defensive linemen over his tenure at Alabama. And again, what we talk about is when we are evaluating position coaches for this Michigan program, we really have two kind of categories we're evaluating. One, can you get it done on the recruiting trail, right? Position coaches carry a lot of weight in terms of formulating relationships on the recruiting trail. And then can you develop that talent into All-Americans, into NFL draft picks? Todd Bates, Freddy Roach, probably some of the best defensive line coaches that we see in the country, both on the recruiting trail and in the player development category. These two names, it's going to be extremely difficult for Michigan to go pluck Freddy Roach from Alabama or Todd Bates from Oklahoma. That being said, I go back to the Tony Alford example where Tony Alford was at Ohio State for 7 years, going back to 2015. This was a guy that didn't seem like he was leaving Ohio State anytime soon. What does Michigan go out and do? Goes and lands him. And so, yes, Freddy Roach, Todd Bates, I wouldn't say most probable guys to end up this Michigan defensive line coach, but the fact that Michigan and Sherrone Moore are reportedly kicking the tires on these caliber of guys tells us that Sherrone Moore is not playing any games with hiring this defensive line coach. And I'll say this, Terence, Jameson, Todd Bates, Freddy Roach, Lou Esposito, and this is not a shot at Greg Scruggs, probably would be really excited, especially with guys like Todd Bates and Freddy Roach coming and coaching this Michigan defensive line. And again, I think what Sherrone Moore is selling, just like you have to recruit players on the recruiting trail, you're essentially recruiting coaches to come join your staff. What is Sherrone Moore selling? You look at some of the position coaches that have joined Michigan, they have elevated their careers. They're all going in the right direction, right? Even the defensive coordinators, Jesse Minter, guys like Mike McDonald, they are rising in this coaching industry. I think Michigan, if you're Freddy Roach, you want to be a head coach going to Michigan, dominating for the next couple of years, you're probably going to get some head coaching opportunities. So I think that's a really intriguing selling point for Sherrone Moore. The fact that we're kicking the tires on Todd Bates, on Freddy Roach, extremely exciting for me. It's a very attractive job for defensive line coaches. We'll see how it plays out. As always, we'll continue to keep you guys updated as this news continues to play out. Appreciate y'all rocking with the boys again. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Go Blue, and we'll talk to y'all later.